Hi, my name is Reverend Dale Brown, and I want to spend a moment or two with you today thinking about the story of the Old Testament prophet Jonah. Jonah is one of my very favorite stories from the Old Testament, and the neat thing is I learned today that my associate pastor here, my colleague, the Reverend Karen Sadbury, also likes Jonah. So I'm sure that we'll hear some sermons about Jonah in the weeks ahead. Jonah is called by God to go to Nineveh, and he does not want to go. He doesn't want to go because the Ninevites, as a part of the Assyrian Empire, are horrible, terrible, vicious people. They're just mean. You do not want to live next to one of them at any time in your life. And so what does Jonah do? Well, he's often called the reluctant prophet. So Jonah jumps in a boat heading in the opposite direction. And he gets going, and a great storm arises. And Jonah says, "It's my fault, just throw me overboard, and the storm will stop." And the sailors are all calling out to their gods and trying to calm the storm and to keep the ship floating, and it just gets worse. So ultimately, they throw Jonah overboard, and the sea becomes calm. Jonah is then swallowed by what we often call a whale, but in the text in Hebrew, it's actually big fish. I think it's fascinating to think of Jonah as a reluctant prophet. I can say in my life, and I'm going to guess that in your life, there are times when God has come to you and said, "Man, I'd really like for you to do this. Would you go do this? Or would you go to this place? Or go talk to this person?" And we're like, "No, I'm not really into that. I don't want to do that, God. Send someone else." Ultimately, though, God's purposes and plans are accomplished. When we face those times when God calls us to step out boldly by faith, we are sometimes afraid. But God is always with us. So keep in mind the example of Jonah. He was a reluctant prophet. God called him to go to Nineveh. He went in the opposite direction, heading for what is today modern day Spain. And it didn't work out well for Jonah. He got swallowed by a big fish. And eventually, he went to Nineveh. We'll talk a little bit more about Nineveh and Jonah in just a few moments tomorrow when devotion. But I'll say to you this. If God calls you to do something, please say yes. The times in my life that have been the most growing for me have been those times when I wasn't really sure and I didn't quite have the confidence in myself to do some things, but I did have confidence in God who had called me. And these sayings that you hear one of them is this: the person that God calls not only is called, but God empowers that person to go. So know if God calls you, God is with you, God empowers you, and God will bring about great things through your experience. Have a blessed day.